that's been on your mind recently has been spiritual renewal with the coming of spring, hopefully, and tolerance or understanding of difference, of people who are different from us. I think learning about other religions, the topic that I've chosen today, is one way to do both of these. To renew ourselves spiritually by understanding the other, and by widening our respect and understanding for people who believe and think differently than we do. We as a nation have always prided ourselves historically that we're a melting pot. You've heard that term many, many times. That different groups, ethnic groups, national groups have come to our shores and they've blended in to form a very strong and new and unique nation. Sometimes there are bumps in that road. We do know our history, that there were some difficulties in the 19th century with some resentment to foreigners. Irish need not apply. Today, there is great fear of those who are coming from south of our border. And yet, I think our history will serve us well, and we will welcome these people who make very important contributions to our economy and culture. However, when it comes to religion, I don't think we've been as successful. We don't understand, often, the religions that are among us. There was a book published about 5 years ago by a religious studies professor at Boston University named Stephen Prothero, and it was called Religious Literacy in America. And it was almost ludicrous reading the book based on public opinion data on what Americans really believed and didn't believe. For example, something like 60% of Americans believe that Moses gave the Sermon on the Mount. Even today, in our Christian churches, there's very little understanding of other churches, let alone Muslims, Jews, Buddhists. Martin Luther King Jr. said 60 years ago, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. You've probably heard about that. Well, he was referring to race. I think you could also say it refers to religion. Some of the college students that I teach come to my class in comparative religions with very little knowledge, not only of their own religion, but of other religions. Several years ago, my wife and I in Ripon offered to revamp the religious education program in our local church, feeling that it would be very helpful for teenagers in the program to learn about Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and also to maybe visit some other churches in Ripon to find out what they were like. Several months passed after we made the proposal, silence. Finally, I called the pastor up and I said, well, what gives? Are you going to let us do this next year? And he took a deep breath and said, well, the Religious Education Committee feels that they should learn their own faith. That's what the program is all about. So we were not asked to do it. About 20 years ago at Ripon College, I had a young woman come into my office. She was in my Christian Scriptures class. And she told me that she was shocked because she thought that the way I was approaching the New Testament was I was a person of faith. And I said to her, well, you know, the first day of class, in order not to confuse students and so they'll sense where my bias is, I do tell them that I am a Christian, a Catholic. She said, well, that's the problem. My pastor told me the Catholics aren't Christians. Now, I was sitting there, and I grabbed the edge of my chair, and I had like 2 or 3 emotions at once. Anger, shock, laughter. But she was serious, very serious. Another student told me back in the mid-90s, after she took a course with me, she said, you know, I think I'd like to take some more religion courses. I'm getting interested in this stuff. I said, well, wonderful. She said, but I have to tell you that a devout Christian friend of mine here on campus told me not to take any more courses with you. And I looked at her and I said, well, why? She said, well, what the person told me was that Professor Smith is a nice man, but he confuses students about religion. Again, my reaction was, maybe there's something to that. Maybe that's what a professor should do. Of course, that's for another talk. Last summer, Judy Harris, who lives in Nishkoro, I believe, but she's a member of the Prairie Lakes Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Ripon, attended a clergy association meeting in Ripon. She was very impressed with Karen Armstrong's book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. And she had been trying to get a community-wide read of the book. She had gone to different service clubs. She came to the college. And so I encouraged her to go to a local clergy meeting. Maybe they, since it was such a powerful book that was so helpful in living a spiritual life with meditation, controlling anger, sensitivity to others, maybe the clergy would sponsor it as a read across the churches in Ripon. Well, she didn't have much luck. I didn't go to the meeting, but she told me afterwards that the complaint by the clergy was that it wasn't Christian, and it had that Eastern religion stuff in it. So they wouldn't endorse it. Why are people, so many Americans, educated in so many ways, so much technology, the world at our fingertips, why are so many afraid or unwilling to learn about religions different from what they've been brought up with or what they practice? Perhaps they're afraid that it will create doubts about their own faith. Maybe it will cause them to rethink and maybe change the path they're taking. Clergy, I think, are afraid of confusing people, upsetting people, or plain losing people to another faith community. Like the people at the start of our story this morning, many paths to God, some people are just convinced that there's only one way to do it, and it's not worth it, or it's even dangerous to study other paths, and they want to convert people to theirs, just like in the story. Whatever the reason that's holding us as Americans back, as a whole, I mean not individual Americans, but as a whole, I think we are a religiously illiterate country. Whatever it is, religious ignorance not only breeds bigotry, but it also closes people off to growing spiritually. The story for all ages that we read this morning from the book by Mary Ann Moore describes very well, how there are different paths to God and different conceptions of the divine. Interestingly enough, as you heard, each of the participants in the story was firmly convinced that their path was the only correct one before starting on the journey. However, the closer each climber got to the top of the mountain, to the summit, to God, the more they were able to hear the song of the other climbers as beautiful. And at the top of the peak, they were all able to join hands, as we saw this morning, and sing together a beautiful new song made up of the melodies of each. What a wonderful tale that teaches us, that story teaches us. The other readings this morning, all from your own Singing the Living tradition, remind us that religious faith should not close us off, but rather open us up to a wider understanding of truth. That doubt can be a healthy component of faith because it keeps us from being smug and self-righteous. And that by nature, God is really one. And that we do not have to think about God the same in order to love God and the neighbor. These are very powerful lessons, right in your own book. I have often thought that since God is above the comprehension of any one of us, and all religions actually admit this, at least theoretically, we need to be somewhat humble about our own conceptions and theologies. Moreover, if people and cultures are different, why should we expect that everyone have the same understanding or even the same experiences of the divine? Muhammad teaches in the Quran that God made many religions since he made many different kinds of people on earth. That's in the Quran. Jesus said, "There are many rooms in my Father's house." And he also said that if any human being shows compassion to another in need, They are experiencing God whether they know it or not. Jews do not try to convert people, since they believe that God reaches everyone through their conscience, which is the voice or the image of God in every human being. Confucius and Buddha preferred to remain silent about God, like one of the members of the story, but they believed that respect and compassion for humans was the best path to a fully developed human life and to spiritual enlightenment. Gandhi believed that he became a better Hindu when he had the opportunity in jail to read the New Testament. He found the teachings of Jesus stimulating to probe the deeper peaceful implications of Hinduism. Martin Luther King Jr. admitted that he came to the value of nonviolence in his struggle for justice after he read Gandhi. Thomas Merton, a 20th century American Catholic monk, said towards the end of his life, after he began dialoguing with Buddhist monks and meditating with them, that he did not think he would understand the depths of Jesus until he really understood the Buddha. What is interesting about these great religious teachers is that they all had a strong faith in their own tradition, but the faith was open to other paths. And astoundingly, they were enriched spiritually by learning about and experiencing other paths. The deeper they went into their own traditions and really understood them, the closer they came to the summit of a mountain. And the more they came to experience transcendent reality, the more they came to realize it was one mountain and one summit after all. Learning and experiencing the depths of one's own religion accurately and fully opens one to respecting other religions. And in turn, this appreciation of other religions can also be a means to search deeper into one's own tradition and enrich one's understanding of it. This is really a paradox that opens one to new vistas of spiritual growth. Now, students at Ripon College who take my Introduction to Christian Scriptures course are sometimes quite surprised to learn about a Jesus they had never been exposed to in their churches. A Jesus who is non-dogmatic, who treats non-Jews, Syrians, Romans, with as much compassion as those in his own religion, and was more interested in how a person lives their life than what they believe, who gets most upset at the religious leaders of his own religion who believe and act as if they alone had the truth and were better than anyone else, especially foreigners and sinners. The parable of the Good Samaritan and the parable of the Last Judgment about the sheep and the goats shocks but often impresses students. People who live lives of compassion go to heaven according to Jesus, whether they be Christian or not, or Jewish or not. But those who have faith alone in the mind do not. Some of the students conclude, that's the kind of religion I can buy into. Jesus is a cool dude. Interesting. When we study Judaism, they are also amazed by the strong moral emphasis in Judaism over the acceptance of doctrines. Judaism doesn't have a creed. Jews do not try to convert others, since, as I said before, they believe everyone is saved if they listen to their own conscience. That's where they find God. That's why you'll never have a rabbi come to your door and knock and say, hey, I'd like you to come to the synagogue. They never do that. Students, when they study Islam at its core, begin to realize that basically it is a religion of peace. That's what Islam means, peace. That it teaches the same thing about war as Christianity, that its followers pray 5 times a day and fast for 30 days a year, and are obligated, not just encouraged, to give a definite percentage of their wealth to the poor. This not only dispels false impressions of Islam among my students, but impresses them how seriously Muslims practice their faith, often with more dedication than many Christians. Students are often turned off today by noisy religious rituals, sometimes theatrical performances in churches. Or they're disgusted by the money pitch that they hear time and again when they go to church. When they read about Buddhism and the silence that it encourages through meditation and the simple lifestyle it lays out, they're very impressed. And some of them want to begin to integrate meditation and yoga into their lives. I have found in my quarter century of teaching religion courses in college that the spirituality of young people is enhanced, not threatened, by studying comparative religions. For those who already have a religious commitment, they often become more tolerant and respectful of paths not their own. And sometimes, some of them go deeper into their own traditions because of these encounters, discovering elements in it they had never been taught. For others, not attracted or no longer attracted to a particular religion, they find a variety of paths from which to choose to develop their own moral and interior lives. What more could a teacher hope for? Do I confuse students about religion? Of course. Real faith must be willing to challenge its certainties if it's to be faith. Now, you can have at it. I'm sure you don't all agree with this. I wouldn't dare do this in a Christian church in Ripon. I'd have to leave the motor running because I'd have to get out so fast. I think the clergy think I am really an agent of Satan, but I really believe this. I mean, I really believe that when you go into these traditions, you find a lot in it that's a lot more open than what people have been taught about. And that opens people to understanding. And it also causes them to rethink their own ideas, their own spirituality, and even to find in their own traditions things that are overlooked. I tell them, I ask them how many go to church sometimes. Well, I don't do that in the classroom. But I'll ask them personally, and they'll tell me. I say, do you find church too noisy? What do you mean? I say, we have singing, we have music, we have prayers. Do you ever have time for silence? No. I said, why not? Jesus went off in silence and prayed. And they kind of look at me. And then they go back and look at the scriptures more clearly and say, yeah, there's a lot more in there than we thought. So these are the kinds of things I think that can help people. And I've certainly been impressed at how students respond. Not all of them are open. Some of them, don't take my classes, and that's fine. But the ones who are really willing to open really don't find that they lose their faith. They find it in a new way. So anyway, your comments, yes?
Well, what you said sounds very